Hello, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Samson Pruitt. I am the owner and co-founder of Slither Incorporated. The reason for this video is cage size for reticulated pythons. This is a very delicate subject. There is a lot of disagreement in the industry about what size enclosures that you should use for your retics. I'm not interested in arguing with anybody else in the industry. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and their opinions are valid on some level. I'm just going to state my opinions, and I'm going to back up my opinions with fact and experience. In the beginning of keeping reticulated pythons, they did not breed well in captivity. Neither did Burmese pythons or any of the other large constrictors. Green anacondas, people tried to breed those in water for years unsuccessfully, and then they put them in smallish enclosures on dry bedding, and the animals started to reproduce. The reason that I'm using reproduction as a representation for the proper enclosure size is because happy animals in captivity willingly reproduce. Unhappy animals and unhealthy animals do not. So in the beginning of all reptiles, most of us kept them in glass cages or glass enclosures. We used heat lamps instead of heat panels or ambient temperatures, and all of us tried to have them in big enclosures because that's what zoos did, and that's what we were used to seeing. And all of us failed miserably in the beginning to reproduce animals in captivity. And then somebody, I'm not sure which one it was, figured out that if you put a ball python in a plastic tub, they breed. The reason that they breed is because they feel comfortable. So what happens almost daily for me is someone will reach out to me, either having bought a retic from me as a hatchling or from someone else, and say, man, the snake was great when I held it at the show, but now I've got it at home and it's trying to bite me and it's trying to bite the stick, and I can't even get it out of its enclosure. Well, generally, if you put a small hatchling animal in a big enclosure with glass sides or a big glass front, the animal will feel as if it's exposed. Obviously, in the wild, predators eat baby retics. If you put the animal in a large enclosure, and this isn't all of them, some of them thrive in a large enclosure, but half or better baby retics will become nervous and defensive and feel exposed. Well, then you can put a hide in. And I get it, and it probably helps a little bit, but what happens is the animal goes into its hide, and you've got it trapped in this cage, which is this snake's universe. This is its whole world. It can't get out of there. You're forcing it to be in there, and then you're forcing it to hide inside of the world that you have created for this animal. Even with hides, lots of young reticulated pythons will become nervous and defensive. And if you don't have hides on the hot side and on the cold side, then a lot of them will not thermoregulate themselves properly because they're so afraid that they stay in the hide either where it's too warm or where it's too cold. So if you insist on using larger enclosures with hides, please make sure that you put a hide on either side of the enclosure if you have in-cage heat, so that your animal has the ability to thermoregulate. Now, what I always tell people, if you can't get the snake to relax and calm down, take the animal and put it in a plastic tub, opaque, not clear, opaque tub, and put it on a rack system. And 99% of the time, the animal immediately relaxes. You can almost see it on their face. They take a deep breath, they curl up and go hide in the back of the tub and relax, begin to eat properly, begin to utilize the temperature variance so that they can thermoregulate themselves and just become much, much more easier to deal with. Imagine this, in the wild, right? When you see a snake, what's it doing? If you see it out in the sun, it's sunning itself. But if you come close to it, it jumps down into a little hole somewhere and hides. If your snake gets out of its enclosure and it crawls around the room, do you find it stretched out exercising? Generally not. If it's been out long enough, you find it curled up in a small little tiny corner, and often big snakes that get loose will try and stuff their whole bodies into something that they literally cannot even fit in, because hiding is a natural instinct that makes them feel less exposed, therefore less threatened, and altogether more comfortable. So let's move on to larger snakes. In my facility, we start out with 6-quart tubs. They're tiny. It's like the size of a shoebox. Little tiny tubs that you can buy for 99 cents at Walmart. We glue plastic deli cups into the bottom of the tub so that we have interchangeable water bowls that we can pull in and out of the deli cup to throw away or clean or whatever. And those animals will stay in those 6-quart tubs until they really can barely fit on one end of the tub. My personal requirements for my animals are that the enclosure is big enough so that if the animal is curled up on one side, it has enough room to be curled up on the other side. So basically, twice the size that the animal is when it's curled up. Now, that does not give the animal much room to stretch out and move around. But in my experience with retics, very few times will they stretch out and crawl around unless there's something wrong with them, unless they're unhappy, or unless they're looking for a temperature that they're not getting, looking for a meal that they're not getting, or nervous and uncomfortable and trying to get out of the enclosure that they're in. If you come to my facility right now, you'll see 300 adult females laying fat and happy curled up on one side of the enclosure. My requirement for there being enough room for the snake on either side is so that if the animal uses the bathroom and you don't get to it immediately, the animal has the ability to move itself to a clean position and sit on the clean side of the enclosure. Now, if Samson Pruitt had a zoo or unlimited funds, would I have larger enclosures? I would do two different things. First of all, I would give the big, confident animals that I'm not interested in breeding any longer, retired females or animals of that nature, a larger enclosure if I put them in the larger enclosure and they were obviously comfortable with it. Secondly, I would install, and am planning on doing so this season for sure, a couple of rooms that are like exercise rooms or play rooms for the big animals. And this time next year, Slither Inc. will have an employee or two who come in the morning and give every single female that is not actively breeding a chance to spend an hour or two in this giant snake jungle gym. This was actually my brother's idea. We talked about it the other day, and I had seen Tracy and Dave Barker do it. They had actual retic enclosures with outdoor pens built with trap doors so the snakes could go in or out during the good weather seasons. And I thought it was amazing. I also thought it was overkill, and none of the animals that they had in those enclosures ever reproduced anything. Females that are breeding want to feel comfortable. Reticulated pythons, large or small, feel comfortable in smaller enclosures. If you don't believe it, think about it the next time that you're trying to pull your snake out of its enclosure to clean it, and how hard you have to fight with that animal to get it out. Gonna tell a funny story, and then we're gonna wrap this up because I've given my opinion. I had a lady reach out to me that was local. She was from Charlotte, about an hour from here. And she had bought a couple of animals from me at a show and wanted to come to the facility and was bringing $1,000 with her to pick out some more animals. We had never had a discussion about enclosure size. I guess that she made assumptions about the way that my animals were set up. And when she got here, she was like, oh my God, these are 20-foot snakes in 8-foot enclosures. I'm not buying anything from you. This is terrible that you do this. And I said, well, that's interesting. You were going to buy $1,000 worth of snakes from me. I tell you what I'll do. This snake right here, big female, 20-foot male tiger, I forget exactly which one it was at eye level, so not difficult to reach and get to, eye level for the lady. I said, if you can get this snake out of its enclosure in 5 minutes, and your husband can help you, I'll give you the $1,000 worth of animals that you came to buy for free. And she was angry at me because she was wrong about her opinions, but she was greedy, so she took me up on the offer. I opened up the enclosure, I turned off the feeding response, I pulled the animal to the side to give her as much advantage as possible, and her husband wrestled with this animal for what seemed like 15 minutes. It was probably about a minute and a half before they were both blowing like freight trains, completely and totally out of breath and exhausted. Because the snake did not want to come out of the enclosure. So then, to show them and to prove my point, I pulled her out myself. This is an enclosure that was 5 feet off of the ground. We set her on the floor in front of the enclosure, and within seconds, she went right up the front of the enclosures, jumped right back in her cage, curled up, and bucked my hand when I reached in and touched her to tell me to leave her alone because she was where she felt comfortable. Is this a case of Stockholm Syndrome? Do you think that all of my snakes are completely and totally brainwashed into feeling comfortable in their enclosures? I don't think so. I would implore you to take into consideration the animal as an individual. If you have a snake that is extremely confident and you set up a large enclosure and you put lots of branches and leaves and different basking spots and all of that stuff, retics are very arboreal given the opportunity. And the snake is comfortable in that environment, meaning that it's not trying to bite and it's eating and it's doing everything that it should do. By all means, give that animal as much room as you'd like to give it. But if you buy a retic from me or from anyone else in the industry and you take it home and you put it in a big enclosure and the animal is being mean, meaning that it is afraid and it's nervous and defensive and trying to bite you, please consider this video and consider my opinion and put it in a smaller tub, and I guarantee you what is going to happen is the snake is going to be happier. I will close with this. I'm not going to show it because, oh my God, Samson would be so terrible. I have an 8-foot female right now that lives, mainland female, that lives in a 28-quart tub. I can barely fit a water bowl in there with her body, because every time that I have ever tried to upgrade her, she freaked out, started destroying her face, started refusing food, and was generally really nervous and defensive. And this is going from a 74-quart tub to, I mean, a 28-quart tub to a 74-quart tub. Some of them are just more nervous and defensive than others, and that's why I want you to take into consideration the individual animal and the needs for each animal specifically as individuals. Thank you for your time.